in a cyclical turn of events. We're back kind of to where we were at the beginning of March, but now it's like 10 days into April and I'm just as overwhelmed, and I'm also still just trying to finish books and it's just all still piling up around me, but here we go again. I guess some progress has been made, and I mean, like, in terms of like from when I started in March, I did make some progress in a reading vlog, which I will link. I mean, I'm literally wearing the same jumper and everything. The only thing that's like markedly different is that I mean, I haven't eaten bread for a while, and also my fringe, which like is looking okay. Anyway, hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie, blah blah blah. Reading vlog, blah blah blah. Don't know how long, blah blah blah. Can you tell I feel sorry for myself? Okay, well, I guess I'll just show you the like books that are sort of like in the process of being read in like in a more steady way than like some of the older stuff that I showed at the beginning of my March reading vlog. Okay, so there's this book, Dr. Edith Vane and the Hares of Crawley Hall by Suzette Meyer. There's this book, The Essential Dykes to Watch Out For by Alison Bechdel. A book that isn't here, that is from my research, is Mona McLean, Medical Student by Margaret Todd. I've read one chapter of that because I can physically read that in the library, but I can't take it out because it's an old edition. I mean, it could be a first edition, but I'm not sure. And I'm like in this like horrible waiting state for like all of my stupid disability stuff to like properly finish and come through. Like for my disabled student allowance, I've had to have like, I mean, I have to fill out a really long form. It has to go to various people, then it comes back to me, then finally I can send it off. And then when I finally send it off, I have to do a DSA needs assessment, which is actually kind of a nice process. Like the person who did it was obviously very lovely. And then she writes a report about what I need in response to the conversation that we have, which is quite long, and it, you know, takes a lot out of you to talk about how sick you are. Then I had an ergonomic assessment, which also had to produce like a report, and then the DSA needs assessment report gets sent to Student Finance England, and then I have to wait until they've processed it, until they tell me that like, yes, they are going to give me money for these particular things or like whatever. So I'm just waiting for them to finally do that. But some of those things, like, they're supposed to help me to read things, and like I need that. So I'm just in this like horrible limbo waiting state where I'm getting more and more overwhelmed because I can't really do my work properly because I don't have like the assistive stuff that I need to help me. That's a little glimpse into how stressed out I am by doing a PhD and being disabled, but there we go. Another of my PhD books is We Have Been Warned by Naomi Mitchison. Yeah, I actually read this like introduction from like a collection of her like selected fiction as like a sort of introduction to her work as a whole, because I thought it probably would be like a useful overview, and I was so right, it was really useful, so that's nice. But yeah, I'm on page 18 of this over 500 page book, so that's gonna be fun. We've got Kith and Kin by Marika Nijkamp, which like I shouldn't have started, but now I've started. It's obviously going to stress me out until I finish it, so that's good. And then two books that I think are probably the most likely to be finished first. The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. Yeah, this one is about 100 and something pages, and I'm 66 pages in, so like I'm a good chunk of the way in. And it also has, it's actually a very pleasing book to read because yeah, it has like quite large margins, so that's nice. And then the other book is Free, Coming of Age at the End of History by Leah Upi. Yeah, this one I am over 50% of the way through, and I think this will be what I finish first. Alright, I'm not sure if I'll give myself a month this time because I am starting this vlog, I guess like a third of the way into April, so we'll kind of see how it goes. But hopefully I will make some progress, and I won't start anything new until I've read at least 3 of these books that I just showed up. I think that's what I'm going to commit to, and even then if I can like finish 5 of these books, that would be great before I start something new. Okay, bye. Hey, it is actually the same day that I started this vlog and I finished this. I was using this nice card that Sean and Bat sent me. I forgot that my ASMR was still like playing there. So I just finished this, which is about it's a memoir, and it's about Leah Upi's life growing up in Albania. There is this like, you know, part 1, part 2 kind of section to the memoir, but obviously also to sort of like history and to like Albanian politics, political makeup, where in 1990 it stopped being a socialist or communist state, like it became liberal. I can't quite remember how old she was, but I think 12 or 13, definitely a young teenager when it happened, and she grew up feeling very strongly connected to and like believing in socialist ideas and sort of what she was taught about freedom and about the role of socialism within the world. And I thought it was really lovely, actually. I think a lot of the way that people deal with their experiences of the Soviet Union and authoritarian socialist dictatorships is to say that socialism is bad. And I think it can be really complicated for people who hold personal or familial trauma from authoritarian dictatorships. But I also think that there still needs to be space for the fact that like socialism can come in many forms, left organizing and ideology, like it's not all leading to some kind of like Stalinist dictatorship, or in Albanian's case Enver Hexa, I think was the name of the person who was the like big dictator. He's referred to as Uncle Enver in this. People can look to the same ideas, you know, people can look to Marxist theory and Marxism and put it in practice in ways that are very like alien to each other. And I really liked how, especially at the end of this, the like epilogue and the final chapter spoke to the kind of contradictions and the tensions and the difficulties, but also the value in having a continued belief in working for people's freedom against a liberal or capitalist state. Maybe, I'm not sure if like Leia would have like expressed it like that. I feel like I'm doing a really bad inarticulate job. There is like a way that this focuses on like specific material objects that is kind of interesting too. There's like a bit about like queuing and picking like a particular object or like a big stone or something, and there's even a bit about like a Coke can. There's some stuff that I don't want to say because I think it's like interesting to find out as you're reading it, but obviously like it is written with hindsight, like, you know, by an adult, but using the kind of childhood framework that she inherited from growing up in this like socialist society, especially the first part of the memoir. And I think that kind of adds to the interest in the book. I didn't know very much about Albania at all, so this was also like interesting in that perspective. Also, I do have like a vague project to read books published after 1991, i.e. like, you know, the fall of the Soviet Union. Obviously this was published like last year or something, like it counts and stuff, so that's kind of interesting. Like I have a post-Soviet book club. You know, like this and Soviet Daughter, I would say, have a similar kind of approach to the experiences of like authoritarian communism, I guess, and like European dictatorships of the 20th century. I just also really loved, like, I realised, like, you know, it's like she's not a character, she's a human being who's alive, so but I really loved like Leia's voice and like I loved her like decision making as a teenager. I liked how she wrote. Now I also just really liked, I just ended up really liking her and like I liked how she approached things. Obviously that is partially because of my own political beliefs. Yeah, okay. Another thing I thought was really interesting, although not explored in super depth, but like definitely kind of talked about, is Islam in this, and like believing in God and like banning religion, banning this idea of God, but then the fact that like Albania does have like a Muslim, like, or like did, and I'm sure does now, have like a Muslim population, and sort of like watching the sort of like return to religiousness, and like in Leia's family, that being sort of part of their history to some degree as well. And I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. I think also because of the way that people see Europe as like a mono-religious space that is mostly Christian, and then maybe they might be like, there are also some Jews, but obviously that's not true. Or people see Europe as a place where Islam is an import into Europe rather than something that has been in Europe for many, many years. In a way, this book felt a little bit like some parts of The Idiot by Elif Batuman, in how it kind of considers the much more porous relationship between, like, for example, in that book it's like Turkey and Hungary, and like the way that like the ideas of like separation and like distinct European identity and basically also proximity to whiteness is actually different than the reality. And obviously I think, you know, there are lots of white Muslims. It's more just like, I feel like a lot of people racialize Islam in a way that means that they just they don't consider that white Muslims can exist, or European Muslims, or like the only Muslims in Europe that can exist are immigrants, which obviously isn't true, to say nothing of like the violence and Islamophobia, and then also the erasure of that violence that, you know, communities of Muslims experienced and continue to experience in Europe. Yeah, I mean, this book isn't really about that. It does talk a bit about like Albanian Muslim identity, I guess, but again, like in a very disconnected way. That's more me like being interested and like thinking about that. But anyway, yeah, all right, I'm sure it will be way longer between my next update and my last update, but I will talk to you then. Some ice cream, and I thought that I hope that the like light isn't that bad. It's just so nice that there's sun, but obviously like, you know, but I mean, I think this is fine. I have done some reading, so I think I'm, you know, in a good position to kind of update you. I've made some decisions as well as I've like actually read things. So I read this library book called Passover Around the World. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it actually, but you know, it was a bit more timely than the Hanukkah kids books that I was reading. It does have like nice illustrations. It's written by someone who lives in Israel, and it was so focused on Israel, even though it was like doing this around the world thing, but then it was like most of the people had like moved to Israel, and you know, I don't think that's a good thing, and I don't like how it manages to make a beautifully diasporic religion and experience into a like ethno-nationalist, like a nation state that is desperate to police its borders and treats Jews within it very differently depending on, you know, their heritage and skin colour. That's not the point, but like so I didn't enjoy this as much as I thought I would, which was a shame. And I also think they did this thing which I think happens a lot to like Ethiopian Jews, where they said something at the beginning about how like all Jews celebrate Passover in this particular way, like they all have a Seder plate, but you know, there'll be different things aside. But then I think when they talked about Ethiopian Jews, they were like, well, they don't actually have a Seder plate in the same way at all, so like you know, that's not actually true, is it? But Ethiopian Jews are just as much Jews as other Jews. So anyway, okay, so then the next thing I finished was Kith and Kin by Marika Nijkamp. To be honest, this doesn't really, I mean, it does work, like it works fine as a book, but at the same time it doesn't work in the sense that like there is a reason why Critical Role is a Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game, like that it uses that format to tell the stories it wants to tell, and the fact that this isn't just makes it feel so much more, not sure if I want to say fake, but just kind of like it doesn't work in the way that the story does. And even then, I mean, I think that the first campaign of Critical Role like is like not great. I wouldn't be able to say that like I guessed all of the story, but what I would say is like none of it surprised me at all, and it just felt very like this is a fantasy, you know. I mean, the writing was fine, a bit repetitive, especially with like a few like key phrases, and then yeah, I don't know, I just think like not everything you love has to be retold in a different format or returned to. Like, I mean, I get that people obviously do that because it makes money, but I think it's silly. Like, there is a reason why forms, I don't think forms are like important despite like instead of content, because I think that can get you into just like really stupid water, but like I do think that like form inflects and responds to the content that you're making. Anyway, I'm like extremely sleep deprived, so next I'm actually going to talk about a book that I didn't read. So that is We Have Been Warned by Naomi Mitchison. I started reading this for my research, and then I was like, this just isn't gonna work. Like, it's not the text that I'm looking for. It doesn't like it doesn't quite fit into my, even though I kind of wanted to, but like it doesn't quite fit into my research parameters or the kinds of works I'm looking for. It's also a bit late for my period. It's from 1935. Also, yeah, I am so sorry. I know I look really, really tired, and it is because I am really, really tired. Funny how that works out. So yeah, like this is something that I want to read, but there's no point in prioritizing it now, and I think it will be quite difficult to read, which is another reason to hold off. I mean, I think I'd like to return this and maybe write about it one day, but like I don't think it's for my PhD, unfortunately. Okay, and then the next book I finished is The Sabbath Actually, before I talk about that, I'll talk about this, because I did watch and read a production of A Doll's House by Ibsen. I had read A Doll's House before, but like I really couldn't remember anything when it was happening. I was like, wait, is this what this play is about? I think it's really great. I think it's a really fantastic play. Like, I don't really know how Ibsen is like so good. And like in this they have like the alternative German like conciliatory ending that he sort of was forced to write, which isn't really conciliatory, and I don't know, I kind of just respect him like so much. But yeah, it's a great play, and it's like sort of got this incredible energy to it. And obviously I did watch a version with Juliet Stevenson, who I actually love a lot, like not only as an actress but I also really like her audiobook narration stuff. Yeah, and there was also another actress whose name I can't remember, who I also think is great, because and then she's been in quite a lot of things too. I'm not going to keep going reading the rest of these, at least not for a while, but I did kind of want to get to A Doll's House because Eleanor Marks, you know, 1880s, relevant, blah blah blah, everybody loves Ibsen. Well, I guess I should say that like Marxist feminists, early like proto-Marxist feminists love Ibsen. So yeah, there's that. But back to this. This is The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. So this book is about Shabbat, or the Sabbath, and it's at points just incandescently beautiful. It's very poetic and sort of philosophical, but also quite grounded in a really lovely way, you know, in Jewish teaching and tradition. You know, I mean, there is like a poetry to Shabbat, and I feel like this captures some of that. Oh. I got an email. Yeah, it's split up and it goes through a lot of things. It does end up talking quite a lot about time, quite a lot about space and like things, quite a lot about sort of relationships, I guess, relation in the world. And yeah, I mean I find it profoundly beautiful, in part because I find, you know, Judaism profoundly beautiful. Like, I feel so compelled by it, drawn to it, and I, you know, obviously going through a conversion process where I will become a Jew, and like I'm so excited to spend the rest of my life, you know, sanctifying Shabbat. So yeah, they call me Shabbat Lover 1995. They don't. I had like an awful headache, not yesterday but the day before, just completely like wiped all of my work plans out. Yeah, I couldn't really do anything at all, like it was just very, very painful. I wouldn't say it was a migraine. People who deal with migraines on the regular, like, you are so powerful, like, oh my gosh. and then like finally in the sort of very late part of the day it went away, and I was just like, oh. And then I was also kind of like, you know, I feel really bad about not being productive sometimes and like whatever. So I started audiobook listening to, because I found a free audiobook of Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, because it's like vaguely related to my research, even if it's not really like the research I wanted to be doing, but none of that research I can do via audio. Yeah, but I started this and I am now about 2 chapters in. I don't think it's very good, and I also feel like, considering the material that preceded this and clearly inspired it, he just takes all of the like radical class politics out of it, like which sort of also ultimately misses the point, in the sense that like it's about, you know, a critique of class and gendered relations, even if it's like flawed and like not very well carried out, which shows that personal, like interpersonal relationships are part of that, and that, like, you know, freedom to love is also about not owning property. Anyway, I mean, I'm not disposed to like it. Like, I don't like D.H. Lawrence. The representation of the character in H.D.'s book, Bid Me to Live, is like so unbearable. It's kind of funny. So I can't help but think of like him like that, where he's just like obsessed with like sex, but also specifically like the difference between men and women. I'm going on a research trip down to another library, of course, in the next few days. So I need to kind of figure out what book I'm gonna bring, or books probably. I don't really want to like waste storage space with this. It's like sort of hard to tell if this will actually be useful for me. I'm still waiting for my disabled student allowance stuff to come in, so I'm still, you know, dealing with that, or trying to deal with that lack of resources and support. So yeah, anyway, next time I update you, hopefully I'll be slightly less tired. I'm hoping to record like some of the things I'll be looking at for my research, because I think that it will hopefully be kind of cool, because there'll be some newspapers from, well, hopefully there'll be some newspapers from 1906 to like 1915. So, you know, over 100 years old, which is pretty old. All right, bye. back to do an update. I don't think I've read anything that I, you know, had already started reading, like finished. You know, I guess I have been making some progress with some things, but not really. That being said, I have finished 3 things. Basically, I really wanted to read some stuff from the long list of the Women's Prize for Fiction, and today the shortlist was just announced, like the day I'm recording this. So I tried to kind of sneak some in as much as I could. I did actually start reading The Marriage Portrait by Meg Farrell, but I DNF'd it. I just like didn't get me in any way, and I had also heard like from other people's reviews that like there wasn't enough of it to be a story, and just like sort of, yeah, some of that. So I decided to just like stop. So then I picked up Children of Paradise by Camilla Gradova, which I read pretty quickly. Well, I've tried to not get my hopes too much up because, you know, it was referred to as being like Angela Carter, who, you know, whilst I find her work kind of difficult, I also think it's pretty ambitious and really great, but like very descriptive, and like she has a very specific style, and obviously very sort of like freakish and gross at points, but also in a way that is very mythical and interesting. So obviously like that's one of the reasons why Children of Paradise seemed so interesting. It's also about like basically a bunch of workers at a special old cinema. That I would say that there were some like positive things about it, but I ultimately didn't feel like it fully convinced me, I don't know, or something like that. Like it, and I felt like some of the ways that violence were explored were just like really badly done, or like not like it began to have a kind of conversation about violence, and also about like violence in terms of film specifically, but it never actually had that conversation. And then it also was playing this sort of like, you know, obviously the work novel has become like a real thing in the past like 10 years, and so it definitely also was sort of partially that, which is sort of vaguely anti-capitalist, but not in a way that feels at all meaningful or at all like, I mean that's not really fair, but I guess I mean it just feels like those novels kind of just tend towards like a level of acceptance that I'm not really comfortable with. Oh, the fact that there are rich people and poor people, and the fact that people have to work in really exploitative conditions, like, and also just boring, mundane jobs that they don't like every day, and it's not very fun, and like blah blah blah. We just have to sort of accept that. That's what, even though those novels are talking about work and being like, yeah, it kind of sucks and it's kind of dehumanizing a lot of the time and like blah blah blah, they never sort of like go any further than that. There was like some vague talk about unionizing and unions in general in this, but they didn't go very far either, and I was kind of disappointed in that too. Anyway, so yeah, the sort of, I guess one other thing for me that like affected my reading experiences that I don't know that much about films, especially like old films, and so I'm sure I missed like a whole bunch of references. But honestly, a lot of people said that put them off, but I don't really care about that. It's more like, you know, you could still read the novel and like get a lot of what it's saying. I'm sure not to the same degree and in the same depth, but like it sort of has a lot of classic themes in terms of like insider, outsider, being an outsider even with outsiders, which is a mood. But yeah, like there was definitely something missing, and I definitely don't think it's like Angela Carter. Even just like in terms of the writing style, like it wasn't like that to him. But I mean, I do think the setting, I feel like a lot of people have said this about it too, I did think the setting was really well drawn, and I did really like, you know, I was really interested about when the narrative shifted from the main character, when she becomes like part of the collective group of workers at the cinema, and changes from being like a singular to a plural in terms of like how she's writing the story. Yeah, I thought the ending was really not good, just like a complete washout really. But anyway, so there's that, bit disappointing. But then I did read Cursed Bread by Sophie Mackintosh, which was also longlisted, and Children of Paradise was longlisted but not shortlisted, and that's the same with this one too. It's actually the same with all of the ones I read, so but that's kind of nice. I mean, this book is also quite short and is set in France, and a lot of people seem to be very confused about like when it's set and like the time period, but it is pretty clear that it's post the Second World War. There's a lot of references to like after the war, after like the bombings, blah blah blah. It's very clear it's probably like the 50s, and also like the fact that they use the lavoir, communal places where French women would go to clean their clothing. It's got to be before people got like a bunch of washing machines and like, you know, it. So I feel like sometimes people are punishing their interpretation and thinking of this book, but that's actually just because they're not paying close enough attention. And I do think that that is something that this book is sort of about. But yeah, I would say like I struggled with this. I do think that Sophie Mackintosh just writes really beautifully. I think even though I didn't like Blue Ticket of hers, I think she generally has like this really deft writing voice and style. That being said, I do also think, I was thinking a bit about like her other novels, and I was thinking how they all do kind of fit in. Like I feel like Elodie, who's the main character in this, I feel like her voice would fit into Blue Ticket and also The Water Cure. I sort of don't know how else to talk about like what goes on in this book. It is about power, it is also about like desire and appetite, I guess. So yeah, people also talk a little bit more about the concept than I'm gonna talk, because I don't think you need to know that. I think it's sort of better for it to unfold. And again, I think that's where I think Sophie Mackintosh is giving you some of the answers in this, and then I think you have to reach for the answers in this more like confidently yourself, you know, like led by your own sort of nose. It's almost a little bit like you have to become sort of a detective about what's being said. It is also about memory. I guess it's about this woman who is the baker's wife, and she's obviously very like lonely and isolated, and then the village where she lives, these two new people arrive, Violet and an American ambassador, and they kind of like stir things up, which obviously is like a classic sort of beginning of any story. Yeah, and like I actually said earlier, like, oh, I wonder if this is going to be like gay but not gay, or like queer, or whatever I said. And I think, yeah, there's a way that this is like a pretty gay novel, but there's also a way that this is quite like, it like shifts out the queer desire, or like tries to direct it somewhere else. And I actually didn't find it necessarily that convincing in terms of that desire, but then it obviously does have like queer characters and queer desire in it, even if like ultimately you wouldn't necessarily say this is like a really queer book or anything. I definitely felt uncomfortable about a lot of the stuff in it, but I mean, I think that's partially the point. It definitely is like a mysterious novel. I think also like the line, I mean, I felt a little bit similar, especially because I read the Kamila Gradova Children of Paradise and then this one, and there was a way that like this violence was like sort of sexualized, and also I didn't like how it was dealt with at all. Like the like gender dynamics and the like, any of that wasn't like really spoken to at all, you know, unless you want to give a lot of like credit or whatever, and sort of say that it was like really subtle. But it's not that I need it to be not subtle, but it needs to be like actually thought through and thoughtful, and I didn't feel there was any thinking around that. Sorry, I'm holding this up even though I'm talking about Children of Paradise. But then so having read that and then this together, it made me quite uncomfortable. And there is just a way that like even sort of sexualized violence, but also kink and like mainstream representations of kink become like a really sort of tropey representation and exploration of like misogyny. And in the Kamila Gradova one, it is quite like cartoonish, and obviously part of that is like, so like one of the characters whose behavior I really didn't like towards Holly, his favorite films, or like his favorite director, sorry, was Quentin Tarantino, which like gave you an insight through his film appreciation into like why he would behave like he did, or like how, yeah, like there is like a link there between his favorite film director, who's obviously a red flag if somebody says that, let's be real, and then how he treats women like in real life. Yeah, anyway, this is very muddled, I'm so sorry. This book, back to Sophie Mackintosh, is quite sort of like, I think Jennifer Love's books called it blurry, which I thought was an interesting way to describe it. It is also quite like hallucinogenic, and it does flip backwards and forwards in time, which is quite like choppy in how it tells the story. And yeah, like it was, you know, it wasn't bad. I'm not sure, when I first finished it I was like, oh, I think I did like this better than Blue Ticket, and now I'm not sure. I mean, I feel like with Blue Ticket, because it was the second book after The Water Cure, which I loved the most and is one of my favorite books of all time, I had more assumptions about it that it was going to be great, whereas with this I had already known that like Blue Ticket didn't work as well for me, so I was a bit more prepared. So maybe that's partially why. Yeah. Did I say anything of interest? Who knows? And then the third book, which I just finished today, finished it like before I looked at what was on the shortlist, was this book, Homesick by Jennifer Croft. So one thing about the book is that I think it was originally written in Spanish. Jennifer Croft translated it herself. She is a translator. I think she's most well known for her translations of Olga Tokarczuk. This book is... So it was published also first as a memoir with photographs, and I actually listened to a bunch of it on audio, and then I got it out of the library because I wanted to see what this particular edition, which is the right one, that has been longlisted for the Women's Prize, which is an edition that doesn't claim to be a memoir, whereas the first edition of this claims to be a memoir and also has pictures, like I said. The main difference between the memoir version and this one is that there aren't any photographs in this one, and it's in sort of vignettes. It was really interesting. Basically I was kind of intrigued. I found it quite like I don't know, there is a way that it's almost like disaffected, but that's partially because it's about like such intense and sort of quite traumatic, and also like quite childish sort of feelings, responses and experiences, and then also things that are very difficult, like a level of proximity to like surrender to the sort of chaos of having a body and of loving a person, and of family sickness, and like just a lot of like very horrible stuff too in terms of like bodily discomfort and difficulty. Yeah, it's about Amy and Zoe, and Amy is the one who's like the main character who's obviously the Jennifer Croft person, and basically her sister Zoe is ill sort of mysteriously, and you know, you get some answers, but also sometimes an answer is not really an answer at all, because you have a name for something that still affects you in a way that is sort of illegible. You know, Amy and Zoe are different ages, but they are very, very close, and there is like a very sort of entangled way, especially, you know, at the beginning, that they exist together and grow together. And obviously that's quite difficult too in terms of like one getting really ill, and so Zoe has these like seizures and things, and she has to go to doctors and experience a lot of like medical related stuff. And yeah, I don't know, I just found it really intriguing. I definitely feel like it's written with this sort of like an elegy-like voice. Yeah, and what's also interesting as well, so I listened to the memoir version because that is the only audiobook that I could access, and then with that you get like a little package of the pages that have photographs on, and in the audiobook, not always, and also it was synced up kind of weird, but sometimes Jennifer Croft will come on and she will give an image description, and then also there's like italicized text sometimes under the images that she reads versus the sort of general audiobook narrator. That's for the memoir, which already I think is very interesting in terms of like, she didn't read her own memoir, but she did do those like photographic intrusions, and obviously the fact that she took them out of the non-memoir version of this novel shows you that she thinks that photographs are much more authentically about like a person than they are like an actual real live non-fictional person than texts that are maybe about exactly the same thing or about exactly the same moment. And that really interests me too. So even if I felt like, you know, I wouldn't say that this was like my favorite, I didn't think it was like incredible, I think that it was definitely kind of difficult and like just not great. I also found it quite interesting, and like it intrigued me in terms of what it was like potentially trying to do or like exploring. Amy, also the main character, she sort of grows up way too quickly, partially through her sister, and I'm sure her sister also felt that way. So Amy like is very clever, obviously she's like homeschooled, and then she goes to university when she's like 15, and so we also get her experiences there. There is also a way that this is like sort of very like almost like cringingly descriptive about just like violence and violence against women and girls and stuff, and in a way, because of how it's written in this sort of like vignette-y, almost disaffected, but again like it's almost more like dissociated sort of way, it makes it maybe slightly less upsetting, but that's also sort of upsetting because it's like the way that you can like live and experience your life is by numbing yourself to it. Yeah, and this one also is a little bit about languages and language learning, but what's interesting is like the memoir keeps in quite a lot of like these notes that Jennifer Croft is saying about like translation and like specific words that are untranslatable and like terminology in different languages for different moments, whereas all of that is taken out because that's all sort of part of and connected to the photographs that were in the book. So yeah, obviously already this is a translation like from the original Spanish version. It was interesting, and obviously as somebody who likes to read things about sickness because I am sick, like I thought that was interesting. And I guess I also think it's interesting in terms of like, I guess ostensibly it's about like Amy's response to her sister's illness, but it's also actually about Amy being very ill, and also people around Amy more than just Zoe being ill, and like dealing with a lot of that. I did feel like, I think one thing that I really like about Sophie Mackintosh's writing style, unlike, you know, Children of Paradise and also like a couple other books that people sort of hold up as like representative, is how like I don't think like her novels are a lot about like bodily, like what women's bodies are doing and like what they look like and what they feel like and pain and things like that, but then I don't feel like she completely annihilates the actual like interiority and like replaces the interiority of a character with just like their, you know, descriptions of what they do to their body, like, oh, you know, like I picked the fingernails on my blah blah blah, or like this man like doesn't want to touch me, so I just pinch the skin of my belly over and over, you know, that kind of thing. Like she doesn't just do that. Like sometimes obviously her characters do things like that, but they aren't just like hollowed out women who just internalized or externalized their life onto their body. Instead they are actually like very present too. And anyway, I don't know, I don't really know if that makes sense, but I should probably stop talking now. Yeah, so none of those three got onto the shortlist, so that's fine. One thing that didn't get shortlisted, which I was going to read and I did think it was going to get shortlisted, was I'm a Fan by Sheena. Oh, I've forgotten her last name, and that book I will be reading even though it wasn't shortlisted. It's also because it was shortlisted for the Delight Prize for Fiction as well as the Republic of Consciousness Prize. Actually, I'm not sure if it was shortlisted. Yeah, it was also shortlisted for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, and so I was like, well, that's like a triple whammy. So I will be reading that at some point, hopefully in the next few weeks maybe. I do also plan to try to read Pod, even though it's like a sort of Marmite book. Also, Fire Rush sounds interesting to check out, and Black Butterflies as well. That was also, I was gonna read it whether or not it got shortlisted. Trespassers I am like kind of interested in. I did put it on my TBR and then I kind of changed my mind, so I'm not sure. We'll see, maybe I'll like it, I don't know. I do still want to read Wandering Souls by Cecile Pinn. I think that sounds really interesting, and I kind of have wanted to read Glory by No Violet Bulawayo for ages, but I just haven't got around to it, so I still might read that, but probably not for like a reading the women's prize long list shortlist thing. I'm not interested in reading Demon Copperhead, like. So in terms of other updates, I have been making a little bit of progress on my dykes to watch out for. I am now on page like 200 and something, so I'm like over halfway now, but I've still got like 180 pages left, 190 pages left. But I really hope to finish that by the end of this month, so I am going to try and like dedicate some times to it, because it's just enough. Like I need to finish it, you know. I'm done. And then the other book that I started that I shouldn't have, basically I started listening to this on audio, and then I was like immediately like, oh, this is probably like the best book I've ever heard, so I really need to, I'm just gonna have to buy it. So then I did, and that book is When the Angels Left the Old Country by Sasha Lamb. Gorgeous cover, just like it's basically Anna Marie Bate, like it's got angels in there. It's a Jewish like YA novel about an angel and a demon, and like it's set in Poland in probably like the 1900s. And listen, it starts like this. In the back corner of the little synagogue in the shtetl that was so small and out of the way it was only called shtetl, there was a table where an angel and a demon had been studying Talmud together for some 200 years. Indeed, they had been studying in that corner since before the little shul was built, and had been rather startled to look up one day and realise an entire building had sprung up around them. Like, obviously I had to get a copy. You know, I do feel a bit better about my research since I went on this research trip that I hopefully put some clips in from. And also, yeah, I got to see a cool exhibition of Hilma af Klint's work, which I also wanted to include in this because obviously last month I talked about reading a biography of her work and I loved her work and stuff. So yeah, it was really amazing to see it in person. Especially, I didn't take any film of the final room because I kind of wanted to just like be in the moment with the paintings. But yeah, her Waiting for the Temple series with these like 10 really big canvases were all in the final room, and it was just so beautiful to just like sit there and like look at them and sort of take them all in. And yeah, that was really nice. So yeah, like we are getting to the end of April. That's the month we're in, which means May is next month, which is kind of wild. But I think that's everything I wanted to update for now. So yeah, I will talk to you, I guess I'll talk to you one last time like at the end of the month. I think that's everything. Bye. It's the final day of April, and over Shabbat I read this. I'd already started a little bit of it, but basically I read like the majority of it, like 300 pages of it, which is When the Angels Left the Old Country by Sasha Lamb. and you know, has this gorgeous cover and is just a really wonderful book. I think it's probably my favourite book of the year so far. I'm kind of thinking about whether I should film a review of this, like separate to this reading vlog, because I feel like I could probably talk about it for like 10 minutes at least, and I don't really want to do that because I'm trying to bring everything to a close for this month. And that's actually a good point. I should say that I also did read 2 picture books at the beginning of this month before I started this vlog. One was called like Have You Seen the Dublin Vampire? And I thought it was going to be cuter than it was actually, or like more vampiric I should say than it was. It was pretty cute. And I also read The Little House by authors I can't remember, which was based on an Eastern European Jewish like folktale about like a man with a really big family asking like a rabbi for help. And I loved that one. I thought the drawing style was really beautiful, and yeah, I just really enjoyed it. So yeah, I read those 2 from the library. But yeah, so those are also included in my April reading, but you know. But yeah, so anyway, back to this. So this is the story of an angel and a demon. The demon is called Ashmedai, or Little Ash, or Ashel. And yeah, so this is it has this like really wonderful, like beautiful sort of Ashkenazi, not like necessarily narrative voice, but just kind of like sense of Jewishness, and then also sort of like care, and like it feels very sort of religious, but also in like a fun and queer and like sweet way, and like a playful and innovative way, or like creative way. And yeah, so I love this. And like if you're interested in like sort of angelic beings and demons, or like shadim and like fairies, like that kind of thing, then I think you would enjoy this. It's also sort of like, I think the you know, one word like hitch for the book is something like, you know, the Yiddish like immigrant story, but it's queer, which, you know, is fair enough. And I love this so much, and I love the angel so much, and like the space it has for like transness is also really sweet. And then also just kind of like there's some really lovely characters, and there's some stuff about unions, and you know, there's like this very powerful scene I felt where the angel goes to a union meeting, and like as I just like describe it out loud, it's like obvious why I would love this kind of thing. And yeah, like I don't know, it was just really brilliant. And like I'm so glad that I read it, even if I also, you know, maybe I shouldn't have started it, but like it was just so enjoyable, and it was also such a nice Shabbat to do. Yeah, and like also this is written in a way that like there are some points where I feel like it's maybe a little bit repetitive, like it says the same facts again, but part of that I feel like is also because maybe it's sort of like taking on the voice of like a folk tale, where, you know, often, especially like oral tradition, where people repeat things quite a lot, in part in terms of memory, but also that's just like the practice of like communal storytelling. And I mean, I don't know how like 100% clear that was, or like was a thing that was being tried by Sacha Lamb, but like I enjoyed it, even if I was also a bit like, you've said that already. It's also like, yeah, so it's really queer, and it's so much about love, and also like revolution, and yeah, just like great. I guess I didn't describe it a lot because like I kind of want to let you experience the plot as it unfolds, but you know, it does obviously tell an immigration story, hence the title. Anyway, I did also finish this as well, The Chagos Betrayal, How Britain Robbed an Island and Made Its People Disappear by Florian Grosset. And it has periods of like colour, and it also has, yeah, some like black and white pages, so it is quite sort of like visually distinct. I think the way it tells the story is it like begins when the majority of the people who lived on the Chagosian islanders, they were forced to leave because basically it is quite complicated, and there is quite a lot of like dates and law and stuff like that, but basically the UK leased, and I think continues to lease, the Chagos Isles to the US for like a military base basically, which they then call, what is it, British Indian Ocean Territory. And so through the, yeah, and then that basically obviously displaces all of the people who lived on the island, who already were displaced onto that island through slavery like 100 years earlier. This is sort of in the 60s or 70s that things are really happening, and then a lot of them were sent either to the Seychelles or to Mauritius. The majority I think went to Mauritius, but basically, you know, they didn't have adequate support, housing, education, healthcare, like any of that, and were just like extremely poor, you know, lived destitute. And so, but yeah, so the graphic novel, comic, whatever, it starts with that displacement, and then it kind of goes back in time and then forward in time again. And I felt like that was a bit confusing because that is quite a lot of things to like get your head around. There's like court cases going on, there's like appeals, there's also obviously quite a lot of different players. It's just like really, really sad. Like these people were treated appallingly, and then, you know, it talks about how a bunch of them went to the UK and then had to fight really, really hard to get any kind of like care. And, you know, the British government basically completely lied. A lot of the people were like illiterate, but they got them to like sign these documents that said that they, because of one court case, they wouldn't like take any further action against the British state or like to try and get any kind of more support or financial compensation or anything like that. But, you know, like a lot of these people couldn't read, you know, they didn't sign their names, they like thumbprinted the documents. Like I feel like that demonstrates how unbelievably manipulative and like appalling a power structure that they were even dealing with. You know, like it's not about justice there, it's about like silencing people and making them disappear. At this point, a lot of the people who had actually lived on the Chagos Islands, like they have passed away or are getting really old, and so I mean they have a bunch of descendants, and obviously the trauma of their displacement, and obviously that's not to say that like their descendants don't have any memories of like where they came from or whatever, but like people who had like a really close direct link to the island have gone. And also that's another reason why, or like that's another way that the state then is trying to stop people from like returning, because they're like, you know, only the people who were first displaced have the right to do that. But obviously that's not really how home works. That's not how, like, it's just not how it should be, right? Like once you've been displaced somewhere and then your family has to deal with the like appalling violent consequences of displacement and then like complete lack of care. And there's like multiple times when like the Mauritian governments get well, a couple times I guess, when the Mauritian government gets money to support Chagosian in Mauritius, but like basically that doesn't really help that much in terms of their like quality of care. And I think especially like the education aspect of it really is like really appalling, and it's also one of the reasons why it's easier to make like communities completely disappear. Yeah, so a really like, you know, upsetting and difficult thing to read and learn about, but also I really appreciated learning. I didn't know about this. I thought maybe Florian Grosset, I thought maybe she was a relative of someone who was from the Chagos Islands, but she's actually somebody from Mauritius who, you know, witnessed like the immigration and the displacement of Chagosian people where she grew up, and then she moved to the UK and wrote this. Yeah, the art style was good. I felt like sometimes people's faces were a bit blurry in a way that I didn't especially like, but generally it's very beautiful, and I obviously really loved the colourful illustrations. Like they are really beautiful. Actually, another aspect of this, I feel like I'm kind of telling you everything in this book, but like you should still read it if you're interested, because like obviously the experience of like reading like a graphic piece of work is obviously different than just like talking about it. One thing that is said in this is like about how sort of like now, and it is really very appalling to know how recently a lot of this stuff is going on and is ongoing. Anyway, I think it's really easy to just like forget what's happening, or like to be lulled into a kind of false sense of security about like, well, the press would talk about it if this thing was really happening, or if this thing was really bad. But obviously it's just not the case, especially when things are being actively tried to be covered up or like to be manipulated to look a particular way, or just, yeah, it's really horrible. Anyway, but that wasn't the point. My point was, now what is going to be sort of one of the things that is like an issue is that the sort of categorization now of the Chagos Islands as a like natural reserve of like all of these species and like protected things, so like, but like basically as a way to stop people from being able to move back there, which is also just this like really insidious, disgusting thing. I mean, it was a military base. Like if the British state and the US cared at all about like the environment, they wouldn't have these gas guzzling, oil land destroying, atomic bomb dropping military complexes. Like there's no real, you know, it's just so bad is what it is. But this wasn't bad, it was good. Those were the final two things I read this month, and yeah, I'm glad that I can now return this to the library and then somebody else can read it, and I really hope they do, you know, like it was good, and it was good to know and learn about. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I want to say something about like my May reading here. I guess like I do have a couple plans. I'm not sure if I'll follow through on any of them. I would really like to get to Squire. I definitely did not read all of the things in my April TBR as I knew. Maybe also Minerva Miscarriage of the Brain, as well as maybe a couple more things on the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist, I mean. There's also I'm a Fan on the long list that I would like to get to, but I don't know when I'll get that through the library. You know, I'm sure there's a big waiting list. It is also Misery May, which is like a Thomas Hardy inspired readathon, and I definitely won't be joining in with the group book, but I might read The Woodlanders, which is the next sort of Hardy novel that I've like bookmarked to read. But again, I'm not sure if I will do that. I do have a lot of reading as usual, but now I'm much less focused on novels, so it was sort of difficult to quantify how much reading I have for my PhD research. But yeah, I will be doing that too, reading a bunch of newspaper articles and tracking things down and stuff like that. But that's all kind of in the mix as well. I don't feel like I made a massive amount of progress in decreasing the number of things I'm currently reading, but I definitely did make some progress. Oh wait, yes. So the last thing that I was currently reading, and I did say that I wanted to try and finish, which is actually one of the reasons why instead I focused on this actually, is Dykes to Watch Out For by Alison Bechdel. And I read a bit more, I'm like 230 pages in or something, maybe a bit more than that actually, but whatever. But I'm not enjoying it so much, and I don't want to force myself through it because I think it's still enjoyable, although I do actually think I have heard from other people that, like, you know, generally they enjoy the first part, like half of it, better than the latter part. But I do, you know, I want to finish all of it, but I think what I am going to do actually is going to return it to the library and have like a little break, and then maybe in a month get out again and finish it off, because, you know, it's silly to like force myself through so that I can get it off my TBR. Like, that's not the point. And you know, I feel like that isn't fair to the spirit of Dykes to Watch Out For. Cool, I think that's everything I wanted to say right now and today. I feel like you can really tell I was very tired in this, but I guess you can do that all the time. I hope you had a good April reading month. Definitely let me know what you read, or if you read any of the things I mentioned. And yeah, also if you have any books that are like this, which is basically the formula for a book that I want to read, is that it's about Judaism or is Jewish in some capacity and is about angels, and yeah, that's sort of it. But I mean, if there's like Yiddish, but I mean any like diasporic Judea language, that's cool, and like community, and like if it's queer as well, that's great. Also, if there's anything about class struggle, revolution or unionizing, I'm also into that, so like let me know. But yeah, I will read like kids books as well as like adult books, and I will also read Yiddish translation. I do have some on my TBR, but I just haven't read any recently. But anyway, there we go. Okay, finally I will go. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Oh, and if you have watched to the end, you can leave me like an emoji. I don't know, like you could leave like a bread emoji. I'm trying to think of like a Shabbat emoji, but I don't think there really is one. You could leave, oh wait, there is an angel emoji, isn't there? You could leave an angel emoji, or like the little devil demon purple emoji. Yeah, okay, bye.